Good evening, everyone. My name is Takiwa Smith, founder and executive director of Science, Engineering, and Mathematics Link Incorporated, and I want to welcome you to tonight's Teen Science Cafe. The Teen Science Cafe is a program of our Math and Science Career Academy whose goal is to expose youth to STEM careers at a critical junction in their educational experience when they're making decisions about their careers. So, if they're in middle school, they can decide what they want to do in high school. Do they want to go to a magnet program? If they are in high school, they can decide what college they want to go to, their major. And for both age groups, it can help shape what out of school time programs they want to participate in and be engaged in. And so this program in an informal setting allows you to meet a scientist, more than likely in a real world application of STEM, learn about their journey, learn about their field, and ask questions about what they do to help shape your career journey and your career choices. So you can learn a lot earlier before you get on a college campus, before you fill out an application. We hope that through these cafes, you find a STEM career path and a possible role model to pursue that career that can help guide and shape your decisions making. So, without further ado, I am going to introduce Carlin Pounders, our program coordinator, that is going to introduce this evening's speaker.
Thank you, Takiwa. Hi, everyone. So tonight's speaker is April Croxton, who is a legislative analyst with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA, in Silver Spring, Maryland. She holds a BS in biology from Virginia Union University in Richmond, Virginia, and a Ph.D. in environmental sciences from Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida. During her 18 years with NOAA, April has served as a research fishery biologist, program coordinator for the NOAA Restore Act Science Program, and aquaculture lead for the National Sea Grant Program Office. Although she is no longer a bench scientist, April maintains an interest in shellfish physiology and aquatic toxicology. In her role as a legislative analyst, she remains an advocate for science and works to improve communication between researchers and decision makers. April is an active member of several professional societies and currently serves as the president-elect of the American Fisheries Society. April's commitment to encouraging the next generation of scientists can be witnessed through her mentoring and engagement efforts like this one. So we are very excited to have Dr. Croxton speak with us tonight. And without further ado, I will hand it over to her.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here and really thankful for the opportunity to be able to share my experiences as a research scientist and more currently as a legislative analyst with you this afternoon and this evening. And I really hope that something that I say or any information that I share with you all will help you as you make your decisions along your career pathway. So without further ado, as you've heard in the bio, in the introductions, my name is April Croxton. I work for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And if you don't recognize the name, I'm pretty sure that you have seen this NOAA logo before. And sometimes you may have seen it during your local news forecast, the weather forecast, or if you are visiting a marine body or a coastal area, you may see this logo on your signs located at that location. So what we do at NOAA is understand and predict changes. And that's in areas from atmosphere, various levels of the atmosphere, all the way to the seabed and those areas in between. And so we take that information and we share it with others. And we use that information to try to conserve and manage coastal and marine ecosystems and resources. So a little bit about NOAA. NOAA was established in 1970. However, the work that we do goes well, past 1970s. And I would say our work goes back more than 200 years. NOAA is composed of 6 line offices. A lot of people say they're departments, so they can be described as departments, but they're 6 line offices. They include the National Marine Fisheries Service. You may be familiar with some of the marine protected areas. There's National Ocean Service. You may be familiar with their work in oil spill cleanups and harmful algal blooms. There is the National Environmental Satellite Data and Information Service, also known as NESDIS. NESDIS is responsible, for a lot of our satellites in which we get our information that we're conducting research, and it will help inform the research that we're doing. Oceanic and atmospheric research, some of the tornado and hurricane warnings and information and research is coming out of that line office. The National Weather Service, also known as, that source for weather information when you're hearing the forecast on your local news. And then the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations. And that particular line office is responsible for flying the planes or driving the ships that help us conduct the research. So our scientists and other personnel are on those crafts, those aircrafts, or on those ships. And they are collecting information, and OMAO, Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, are guiding those vehicles. There are about 12,000 NOAA personnel worldwide, and about half of those employees are scientists and engineers. So you'll see that 2 of the line offices are bolded, and that's because I worked in 2 of those line offices. So the National Marine Fisheries Service, that's where I was a research fishery biologist for more than half of my career. About 14 to 15 years, I was an employee, a scientist in the National Marine Fisheries Service. And now I'm currently in the Oceanic and Atmospheric Research line office, where I am a legislative analyst. So before we go too much further, I'd like to share with you a little bit about my background and how I ended up where I am today. I am a native of Richmond, Virginia, and I stayed home and went to school at Virginia Union University, where I obtained my BS, my Bachelor of Science degree in biology. I then went on to Florida A&M University, where I graduated with a Ph.D. in environmental science. My concentration, in that particular field was aquatic toxicology. And you'll hear that theme as we go throughout the presentation. So I have about 18 years with NOAA. It's almost 19 years in a couple of more months. And during that time, I have been in various roles, such as a policy analyst, an ecologist. Most of the career has been as a research fishery biologist, and now more recently as a legislative analyst. So growing up, I always knew that I wanted to be in the science field. I tell people I probably knew I wanted to be a marine biologist ever since the 4th grade. So that's how I kind of planned my life. I was going to become a marine biologist. And, I wanted to work with dolphins. And, people often laughed when I say, I wanted to work with dolphins, and they would pick with me, you just want to look at dolphins and play and swim with dolphins. But it was more than that. I actually wanted to work with dolphins because I was interested in how humans were impacting the lives of dolphins. So what were our behaviors doing on land that impacted these mammals? And so that really started way back when in elementary school. And so that meant that my parents worked very closely with my counselors and with my school teachers. And I spent a lot of time in math and science programs. I tell people I went to school on the weekends and I went to school during the summer. I don't think there was ever a summer that I wasn't in school. In some type of science program, math or science program, all the way up until high school. And so, in Richmond, we had a center that really focused on students that were interested in science, ecology, even a little bit of planetary science. So definitely made sure that I was a part of those. And my mother made sure that, I was always enrolled in those programs. Biology clubs throughout my middle school and high school years, I was always, even college, I was always a part of biology clubs, leader of some type, being in those and participating in those clubs. Summer camps, that goes hand in hand with those math and science programs. Every summer, I was enrolled in some type of summer camp that kind of fostered and helped me to gain additional skills to prepare me to become that marine biologist that I thought I wanted to become. Counselors and advisors, they were very instrumental in preparing me for my journey. I actually had, several counselors. I still remember their names. And that's just because they were so instrumental in not necessarily motivating me, but helping me find resources to help foster my goals. And so I can remember my high school counselor actually cautioned me about majoring in marine sciences or marine biology, because of course I'm going to, in high school, when it's time to apply to a program in undergrad, I'm going to study marine biology. And that particular counselor, really cautioned me about narrowing my focus. She explained the importance to me about keeping a broad focus. And that's something that I still follow many, many years later. I really like to look broad, and you'll see that especially exhibited in my degree. So my first degree, my BS, is in biology, not marine biology. It's in biology. And I could literally, anything with science, I can use that degree, in work in that field. Whereas if I had majored in marine biology, I would have been specialized in a certain area. And maybe there would be opportunities that would not be open to me because I didn't have that more broader knowledge. So that's the first thing a piece of advice that I definitely want to share with you all, making sure that you remain broad. I know we have some interests and we really think we want to do this, but there's an opportunity out there in the broadness as well. So I ended up going to Virginia Union, again, majoring, in biology. I was awarded a fellowship from the Environmental Protection Agency because when I was growing up, I was not familiar with NOAA. NOAA was not located necessarily in my area. So I really didn't know anything about NOAA. And I really learned about NOAA later on in my graduate career. But EPA was where I was headed. I thought that I wanted to be a marine biologist and I wanted to work at the Environmental Protection Agency. And so I did a summer internship at the Edison, New Jersey, which is the Region 2 office. And I actually had the opportunity to fly on helicopters. I was a part of the helicopter monitoring program. And I'd never been on a helicopter before. And this was all summer, a couple of days. I want to say it was every day. Every day for many weeks throughout the summer, I flew in a helicopter and we collected water samples along the coast and along beaches in New York and New Jersey. And so this particular study was really for public health. We were looking at fecal coliform levels, and just looking at beach safety, making sure that the biology and some of the microbes, the microbiology was safe for our beachgoers to actually partake in. So that was a lot of fun. The other piece to the helicopter monitoring program was looking at oil slicks. So we would ride up along the coast and in different areas and see if we saw any large aggregations or large pieces of trash and debris, as well as oil slicks. So that was really, really fun. And it cemented, this is what I want to do. I'm loving this. I love collecting the samples. You'll see in the picture on the left, we had a lab component too. So, we go out, collect the water samples, and then we go back to the lab and analyze them. And I think during my time, we did not have any beach closures, but we were close. There was one time we were close to having a beach closure, and that was pretty interesting to me. And so the second undergraduate summer internship that I had was with the Weill Cornell Medical College. I've shared with you that for many years, I knew I wanted to go into, the environmental field. But there was a small piece, in my brain that said, you may like pediatrics and you may want to be a doctor. And so I actually applied to this program and I was awarded the internship. And I'm so glad that I did it because it really cemented the fact that that was not the path that I wanted to take. I was truly an environmental person. I really wanted to work out in the field and collect samples. And the Weill Cornell Medical College internship, it was definitely just strictly lab, a lot of lab work. And I really didn't have a chance to, feel that fulfillment as I did with, some of my other internships, especially with EPA. So I'm not quite sure if you remember the title of my presentation, but I'm going to share with you how Detours shaped my career. And this photo is a representation of those times where Detours kind of shaped my career because the image is not clear. It's a little fuzzy, and I can't find a straight line anywhere in this image. And this is how I felt at certain times, as I was migrating through my career, along my career path. So I wasn't quite clear on what path was the best path to take. And most times it wasn't a direct route to my goal. And so an example of that is graduation. So my first detour happened during my senior year of undergrad. I graduated in May of 2001, and I was all prepared to be a marine biologist and work for EPA. That was my goal. I knew that I needed to go to Rutgers because Rutgers had a great relationship with the Region 2 office in Edison, New Jersey, where I had conducted my internship. And so I was on that pathway. I was going to go to Rutgers, get my degree, and then go work for EPA. I don't know what happened. I can't even really explain the situation, but I was graduating in May. I was going to Rutgers. By July of that same year, I was enrolled at Florida A&M, and I was going to Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida. I remember applying for FAMU, for Florida A&M, but very vaguely. But somehow, I received a call from some of the professors, and they said, we really want you to work with us on a project, and how about coming on down to us, down to Florida? And I didn't know what to do. But I just trusted my gut and ended up where I actually attended Florida A&M. I had paid my housing fees at Rutgers and, it just whatever. I was on my way down to Florida. And to me, that was the first detour, but it was probably the most pivotal detour that I've made in my entire career. And I would go as far as to say my life. So graduate school. Ended up going to FAMU, Florida A&M University, and joining the Environmental Sciences Institute. And it was a great opportunity because NOAA has a great relationship with Florida A&M University. And so therefore, I was awarded a graduate sciences program fellowship. And with that fellowship, you received hands-on experience with on various topics. Those topics were, of course, related to NOAA's mission. And you would actually you would leave your institution, your school institution, and move up to that NOAA laboratory. Well, in my case, remember I wanted to work with dolphins, but at Florida A&M, I was working with oysters. So I went from, I'm going to be a marine biologist and work with dolphins, to now being an environmental scientist student and working with oysters. So again, seeing how sometimes your projection changes as you move along your path. And so again, these are just a couple of field pictures and some of my hands-on experiences that I gained from that internship. It's a fellowship program where I actually moved to and worked at a NOAA lab. And so I graduated from Florida A&M and started a new journey. With that fellowship, you actually became an employee of NOAA. So yay, as hard as it is trying to find jobs, especially for students and science majors, this was a great feat. And so I was super, super excited. I had a job and I was doing something that I really loved. And these are pictures that are very representative of, some of the field work, some of the lab work, my oysters, of course. And the picture at the top in the middle is actually in South Korea. So I call this slide a new journey because, making that decision way back in 2001 really opened up another door for me. So I took another journey. I was able to work in South Korea and visit South Korea and work with colleagues, at a sister agency in South Korea for many years. For about 5 years, I visited South Korea and was able to conduct research and share that information. So, having that international collaboration was awesome. It was just great. Being able to interact with new people, taking cruises, scientific cruises, and meeting new people, working on projects where it may not be your project, but you're working and collaborating with other scientists. It's a great networking and a great opportunity to learn from each other. So the new journey was just awesome. So what kind of work did I actually do in the lab? What was my research focused on? And my research was really focused on bivalve immunity and immunology, and that's what I studied. I tell folks, I used to be a shellfish doctor, and they look at me kind of funny. And I explained to them that I measured immune responses in shellfish. So just like we go to the doctor and we see a phlebotomist and they extract blood and they're able to look at the components in the blood and some of the functions of the cells in our blood and tell, if there are any, issues that we need to correct in our bodies. Well, for shellfish, I was actually extracting their blood and looking at their cells. So I'm not going to go too much into the details with the, with the specifics of the work that I did. But this slide kind of tells you some of the functions that I looked, the defense functions, because we know our immune systems are defense systems. And so, yes, shellfish have blood. It's not red in some of the species that I was actually looking at. So I looked at oysters, and I'll share a little bit more information in some other slides. But I measured their blood. I extracted the blood from, their muscles and looked at these cells, their immune cells, which are called hemocytes. And those cells were very similar to our white blood cells, in which they try to recognize non-self particles. So anything that doesn't belong in the system, they would try to recognize it, and then they would attach themselves, try to eat it, and then there will be chemical processes that took place within the cell. And so those defense functions could be altered by many things. So it could be water quality, temperature, is there enough oxygen in the water, pollutants, so chemical pollutants, and whether there was enough food, so food availability. So that's what I did. I measured the immune responses of shellfish species in response to environmental stress. Climate change, I started looking at ocean acidification in shellfish species. So that's what I did during my time as a fisheries biologist. And so, as I mentioned, these are some of the species that I worked with. The hard clam, the northern quahog, soft shell clam, blue mussel, bay scallop, and the eastern oyster. So these 5 species were very important for the area that I was working in. If you remember, I worked on oysters in Florida because, as most of us know, oysters are very important economically as well as ecologically. So they are a food source, and they, produce and allow our producers to gain money. But they're also good for the environment because they actually filter particles out of the water column. So they're very important to us in 2 areas, economically and ecologically. So I just transferred some of, the information that I've learned with the eastern oyster in some of the areas in Florida. And then I began working when I moved to the NOAA lab in Connecticut. I was actually able to work with some of the same species. So the eastern oyster, of course, its geographic range is along the eastern coast of the U.S. And then I worked with some of these other species that were more prevalent in the Northeast. So a lot of fun. No, I don't eat these species because I look at them as samples. So, a lot of people with scallops, you actually eat the mussel. It's called the adductor mussel. And what you're eating in scallops is actually where I used to take, extract the blood. So when I look at a scallop, I'm looking at how much, in my mind, it's how much sample would I be able to get out of that scallop. So no, I don't eat any of the species on the screen. So that was my life as a scientist. A lot of laboratory work, a lot of experiments, a lot of analyzing, sitting in front of machines and really analyzing the data, field work as well, and really just, trying to learn as much and contribute as much to the scientific body and the scientific community. But it was a lot of fun, really enjoyed it. And I miss it sometimes. I'm not doing it any longer, but I do definitely miss it. And, these were, like I said, these are representations of, some of the daily activities that I did as a scientist. You'll see in the top right-hand picture, those are blue mussels. And I don't know if you can see it, but there are pipette tips coming out of them. And so the little trick for me, because, with shellfish, they close up their shells, and especially with the blue mussels, their shells are pretty tightly closed. And so in order for me to be able to stick my needle and extract the blood, I needed to somehow wedge the shells open. So we had a neat little handy tool in which we use pipette tips, just slightly stick the tip of the pipette in, and that would give me enough space to be able to extract the hemolymph, the blood. So just wanted to share that little fun tidbit because most people are interested in how we are able to extract hemolymph from species, especially like hard clams, but also blue mussels. So I would say that the most exciting and important part of being a scientist is to share the information that we gather. So all of those experiments, all of the analysis that we are doing throughout the days, it's important that we share that with the community. And so this is just a representation of one of my projects, one of my studies that I worked on. And just some of the data that I was able to share with the community and to be able to contribute to the scientific community and body of language. So this brings me, to a small schematic. I just kind of want to lay it out a little bit for you. Just a recap. Started off grade school, like I said, I wanted to be a marine biologist. Moved on where I wanted to work for EPA. That was in my undergraduate years. And then at graduate school, was a researcher. So I don't know if you can, you really see it, but I want to work for EPA. I started with a marine biologist, very specific, very focused. To graduate school, I broadened my horizon. With that environmental sciences background, I now have knowledge of environmental chemistry. I have knowledge of policy, environmental policy. Whereas if I had stayed in that very concentrated marine biology realm, I may not have had, the skills that I had by the time I had gotten to graduate school and into my earlier career. So the next in my early career, I said I wanted to know how decisions are made that impact what I do as a bench scientist. So who was making those decisions? If it were up to me, I would be doing oil research, looking at how contaminants impacted every species, every marine species. But I couldn't do that. There were certain goals and missions and objectives that my organization had for me to really focus on. And that's what I was directed to do. But I wanted to know who was making those decisions. How were those decisions being made? And then that kind of progressed into where I like to say I am now, mid-career, and where I want to serve as a liaison between researchers and decision makers. So it's no longer doing the actual research, but now it's being that person that can communicate between the two important pieces of the science field, the researcher that's doing the actual work, and then the decision maker, because ultimately both parties are in partnership. The researcher, needs guidance sometimes from the policymaker or the decision maker, and the decision maker needs the information that the researcher has to make those decisions. So it's definitely a partnership. So this brings me to my next detour in my career. And like I said, looking at decision making, that was my new focus at that time. And so this led to a lot of sleepless nights of thinking about my future. I'd always wanted to be a scientist. Ever since the fourth grade, that was my thing. I wanted to be a scientist. And here now I'm talking about wanting to be a liaison between the scientists and decision makers. So I'm leaving that science background, and not necessarily the science background, but just I'm leaving that hands-on science piece. And so I didn't know what to do. So what do I do? Well, that led me to a couple of what I like to call professional internships. I did a series of these. I did about 3 or 4 details or professional internships. And I spent about 6 months or more in certain areas and certain offices where I gained additional skills. So how to be a program manager, how to be a coordinator for a specific topical area, how to run funding competitions, policy, learning a little bit more about policy. And so these skills really led me to the detail that I, started not too long ago, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was as a legislative aide or a legislative analyst. And so I was approached about my interest in being on a legislative team. And I said yes. I had no experience, no knowledge. I mean, I knew about laws. I remember my government classes and information, learned in those classes. But what does a legislative analyst do in a science agency? I had no idea. But I love to learn. And I said, I'm going to do this. So I can do this. And I said yes. So I've been a legislative analyst for about 4 years now, and it's never been a dull moment. So what do I do as a legislative analyst? I communicate science to the Hill. So that means I work with our subject matter experts, which are our scientists in my particular line office, and I help them communicate the science and our research activities to the Hill. So whether it's a member, a congressional member, or whether it's to a committee staffer. I feel like this experience has made me a more well-rounded scientist. It's great that I have that science foundation, but now I see the bigger picture. I see all aspects. I have that scientific foundation, but I also know what decision makers need, the information they need, the way or the format that they need that information delivered to them. So now I feel, like I said, I feel like a more well-rounded scientist. And I really understand both needs. I understand what the scientists need, and I understand what the decision makers need. And more importantly for me, I feel like I have more of a chance to influence the science in this role than I did as a scientist. As a scientist, yes, I'm out there, I'm collecting the data, contributing to the scientific community and the literature. But in this case, I also have the same opportunities to do that. And in some cases, even more so. So my daily activities as a legislative analyst, I respond to questions and I help our subject matter experts, our scientists, respond to questions from the Hill. I help prepare for meetings that our scientists will have with members or with committee staff. And that's always fun. It's always good to be able to just sit quietly and listen to those conversations and hear some of the members and hear the staffers and what they're thinking. It's so interesting. And then get ready and help prepare our leaders for hearings. Sometimes there are hearings on the Hill. And so preparing our leaders for that, making sure they're well prepared to answer questions. These are some of the things and some of the activities that I do in that position. One thing that's interesting, I talked about contributing to the scientific literature. Well, in this case, I'm actually able to contribute to legislation, to actual laws, to things that are in public law. That's amazing. So it's almost the same thing as having a paper, authoring a paper. And it's really cool because I actually get to see my words. Just like I saw my words in my journal articles, I'm able to see my words in some legislation, even if it's like a small phrase. It's, oh my goodness. These are my words. I contributed this to this law that's now a public law. So that's awesome. It's so cool. So this is a big stretch for me because I never thought that I would be in this space in policy when I was in school. For me, it was all about the science, all about experimentation, getting dirty, getting my hands dirty, getting outside, taking samples, what have you. But I later learned the importance of policy and how it can influence scientific research and even how research can influence policy. So, I'm definitely going to share some examples of that with you today. And here's an example using Menhaden. So I shared earlier that I'm from Richmond, Virginia. But my parents are from an agricultural and fishing community off the Potomac River. And so I grew up hearing about fishermen, collecting the fish, working at the fish factory, catching Menhaden. So these are things that, I remember growing up. And, as I was thinking about the presentation, I said, wow, this would be a good example of science influencing policy. So the Menhaden, the Atlantic Menhaden, is found in coastal and estuarine waters along the Atlantic coast, so along the eastern seaboard. It supports commercial fishery. So this is definitely an important fish. It's harvested and used as fertilizer, animal feed, and bait. So it's really, it's a very interesting fish. And it is a major source of omega-3 fatty acids, as well as a food source for some larger fish and predatory birds. And so, because of these all of these properties and characteristics and benefits of this species, it's important that, we make sure that the species is still available and it's still around and we're not overfishing. And so for this presentation, I said, well, this is something that kind of touches me because I'm familiar with the Menhaden. So as I was preparing for the presentation, I'm learning all new great things about Menhaden. So as we're talking about how research influences policy, and so this is an example. So I started asking, as I was looking up this example, I started asking myself, well, who manages the harvesting of Menhaden? And that's the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And there are several of those in different locations, different regions. So, we talk about getting involved. How do I, if I'm interested in a particular policy or I'm interested in research, how do I learn more about the research, or how do I learn more about the policy and the laws associated with that particular research? So who researches this, this species? And there are many groups who are involved in research. I learned that NOAA is a part of that group. Academia, a lot of institutions, there's a lot of students that are researching Menhaden, and then, like I said, state and federal agencies. There's another group that I learned about in my research, and that's the Chesapeake Bay program. And this group, is comprised of the governors from a couple of states, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. And they actually have come together and put into agreement, that they're going to take care of the resources in the ecosystem in the Chesapeake Bay. So getting involved, looking at these organizations and seeing what policies are have an impact on the research, and particularly in this case, Menhaden. And so, the agreement that I was talking about is the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. And then there's another piece of policy. It was an executive order. And executive orders, they actually come from the president. And that's where the president is saying, you shall do something, X, Y, and Z. In this case, it was an executive order by the name of Federal Leadership in Chesapeake Bay Protections and Restoration. And so it was issued in 2009 by then President Barack Obama, and it recognized the Bay as a national treasure and called for renewed efforts to restore and protect the estuary. So this is, you're seeing the research that's being conducted by these various agencies, whether it's a state and local federal agency or academia, or these Chesapeake Bay programs and activities. That information is being taken and then shared with decision makers. And then in turn, they are making decisions such as this executive order or some of the other agreements. So if I were a student and I'm interested in getting involved, well, how do I learn a little bit more about policy? How do I get involved? How do I talk to my, as a citizen, like a public citizen, private citizen? How do I talk to my local officials or find out more information about policy and the policy that's needed or policy that I would like to see put in place? So public meetings, I looked at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission site, and they actually have public input sessions. So there are areas or times when you can provide public input. So, this is another area of where you can provide information. Informational sessions. The picture at the top is of a student that's at a conference. So informational sessions can be whether it's a session at a seminar at a library, or it's at a conference, a scientific conference. And this young lady was giving a presentation, and it was entitled "Evaluating the Impacts of Atlantic Striped Bass Harvest Control Rules on Their Prey, Atlantic Menhaden." So that's additional research or information on the research. General Assembly, the picture in the middle at the bottom is about the Maryland. I just chose the Maryland General Assembly. Reach out, reach out to your local members. As a private citizen, that's something that you are able to do. If this was, something that I was interested in as a private citizen, I could reach out to my local, representatives. There's also your U.S. representatives, as well as your state senators. I included the Chesapeake Bay program, which is the photo on the right, because that's another group, getting involved. You can talk to them about the research that they're doing. They can tell you more about the policy that's taking place. And another example, this was a natural disaster in which, policy kind of influenced the research. And this is my final example of the two, how science can influence policy and how policy can influence the science in turn. So the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, that took place in 2010. And basically it was an oil rig that exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's an estimated 134 million gallons of oil was actually spilled during that explosion. And the subsequent days before the actual, months, I should say, before the pipe was capped. Out of that catastrophe, there was a law that was, introduced and passed. It's called the Resources and Ecosystem Sustainability, Tourist Opportunities, and Revived Economies of the Gulf States Act of 2012. And this law actually, had NOAA establish a science program. So in this particular piece, this is an excerpt, that photo or image at the bottom of the screen is an excerpt of language from that bill. And it actually says NOAA was authorized to establish a science program with other federal agencies. And what they were supposed to do is carry out research, observation, and monitoring to support the long-term sustainability of ecosystem, fish stocks, fish habitat, recreational, commercial, and charter fishing industry in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is an example of how a catastrophe actually spurred policymakers to put in place a law, and then that law directed the type of research that some of our agencies are working on. So this was another example of how the two go hand in hand, science and policy. This realization didn't happen for me until, I became involved in the policy side, but I'm glad that I'm aware of this now. So now I kind of answered that question from the beginning of, who makes the decisions and how are my decisions or my activities as a scientist influenced? And so I was able to answer that question for myself. So we talk about opportunities. I said detours are hidden opportunities, but those opportunities are beyond and bigger than just research. The opportunities are networking, being able to engage with other folks, with other colleagues in the field, or working in professional societies, networking and sharing the information across various venues. So I just wanted to make sure that I shared that as well. It's not just the research that, some of the detours can unlock, some of those opportunities. It's also interacting and building those connections with other folks, your colleagues, basically. So I'll end with this. That detour, that very first detour, was it an opportunity or was it something that I regret doing? Wholeheartedly, 100%, it was an opportunity. It was a great opportunity. So opportunity, yes. In this case, it worked out well for me, and it was probably the best decision that I've ever made in my entire life. Sometimes detours, sometimes you make decisions. It doesn't always turn out to be the best thing, but you learn along that process. But in this case, it was the best opportunity for me and the best detour and decision for me. So with that, I will stop. Thank you so very much for inviting me. And again, I hope that something that I shared, was inspiring to you or help you make decisions as you move along your career path. And I'm here for questions. Thank you.
Wow, that was so interesting. So, my first question that I'll pose to you to kick us off with the Q&A is one that's very relevant, I would think, because you talked about the role that decision makers play in carrying out scientific work. So, specifically, I thought about this question when you were talking about that first detour that you actually just ended with. Um, Teens, they are at a point in their lives, as Takiwa said in the introduction, where they're making these decisions about what classes to take, what path to go down. Do you have any tips, any decision-making tips that you used during that time when you were making that first decision between Rutgers and FAMU, or any that you've learned along the years that teens can take note of?
Yes, definitely for me, I've learned to trust some people say trust your gut. I listen to my gut. If something feels right, then I typically go with that. And I understand sometimes it's so confusing. When I tell you that I had such a hard time making that decision between, well, not really the Rutgers and FAMU, it was more of whether I would go to science, leave science. That was a very hard decision. But I would say talk it out with someone. That's something I learned. Just ask someone, can you just have a conversation, just throw out some ideas and just talk it through. Weigh the pros and cons. Think about your final goal. Really think about that final goal. And if you choose option A, will it get you to that final goal? Not necessarily will it get you there faster, because sometimes faster is not always the best. But what are some things that you can learn along the way to get you to that goal? And the same thing with option B. So talk it over. Definitely have someone that you can, just really brainstorm with. Have some time with yourself. You know what you want. Ultimately, this is your career. It's going to be your life. So make sure it's something that you feel passionate about. I think for me, whatever decision I've made, I feel good about it because I'm doing something that I love. And so when you're in the sciences, it's going to be long hours. It's going to be long incubation times. So you need to make sure that you're really passionate about it. So make sure that that passion is a part of your decision making. Listen to your gut, have someone, a trusted person that you can talk to and kind of bounce ideas from. So that would be my recommendation.
Awesome. And then second question for you is, when it comes to marine science and dealing with bodies of water, particularly like oceans and even rivers and lakes and things of that nature, we know that climate change is this huge issue presently, with implications for the future as well. So given what we know and what we know about climate change, is there still opportunities for young people to do research in marine science and have longevity in a career in marine science with the threat of climate change?
Yes, emphatically yes, because there are so many unknowns. There are so many unknowns with, the estimates and the warnings that we're receiving about climate change and what we can expect or what we're already seeing in some cases. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know how our water bodies are going to change. We don't know how the food web is going to change. We don't know how our habitats are going to change. So it's important that we continue this research so that we can be prepared, for those changes. So yes, there is definitely longevity. In some cases there are going to be, winners. If in some cases with climate change, with warmer waters in some areas, you'll have some species that will thrive in that. So we need to learn more information about that. We need to learn how are warmer waters or changes in food composition, how is that going to affect our species that are currently out there, the whole ecosystem, the predators, the prey, food source, all of that. So yes, emphatically, yes, we still need research.
Another question that we have for you is, particularly as I was reading your bio, and even you mentioned in your presentation the leadership roles that you hold now, as well as when you were a youth, the opportunities that you took to take on leadership roles as well, and like the clubs that you were in and such. Do you have tips for teens on being a leader?
Definitely. It's scary. So even coming from someone that's been, in the field for a long time, being a leader is scary. We're not born, knowing everything. To me, I think leadership in some cases is learned. There are certain skills that make you a better leader, and we can always learn to be better leaders. You may have a certain personality where people automatically follow you or what have you, but there are always skills to learn to be a better leader. But it is scary. Taking a leadership position is scary because you're putting yourself out there, and you're saying, okay, I will represent this particular group. And that is a scary thing. And it's okay. It's all right to be, to have that fear. But on the other side, you have that confidence. You should have that confidence that you are in this field, you have the knowledge, and you can do it. Another, little tip I would add with leadership, and just thinking about if you want to be a leader in your local science club or biology club, it gives you the opportunity to contribute. As the leader, you can say, I would like to change the direction of XYZ. So because now I'm the leader, I can put those plans into place. So it's an opportunity for you to make changes that you want to see. I always say, we can complain all we want, but if we're not doing anything, it really doesn't mean anything. So, if you really want to see change, or you want to see some differences in your whatever interests you have in terms of the science field, or you want to head in a different way in your research, become a leader, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be, sometimes you don't have to be like the head. You can also lead as a member of a team. That's something that most folks don't even think about, but you can be a leader and not necessarily have to have that title. So that's important to know too. But it's scary. It's scary for adults. So don't, just do it. You will be fine.
That was really, really great. So to close out the Q&A, I did want to ask, I know you said that interested youth could reach out to their General Assembly, state representatives. I think it was really great that you talked about the clubs, the internships that you took advantage of along your path. Are there any that you can recommend to kids?
So I remember, and this is like full circle. When I want to say in middle school, maybe I was a page. So they called them pages, and pages are, they're like assistants. They're youth assistants in like your local government. So in Virginia, I was a page, and I actually was able to go into the legislative, session, and I was basically an assistant to the delegates and whatnot. But that's an option. Definitely look at your local government and see if there's an opportunity for you to volunteer as a page. I'm pretty sure it's probably like a formal thing. I don't remember how I was looped into it. The other thing is, your local like representatives, House representatives, and your state senators, if they have offices and your representatives will, and say if there's an office located near where you are, see if you can volunteer. Go and volunteer, especially if you're interested in learning. They could always use the help, I think. So try to volunteer. And in terms of, honestly, I can only tell you about the Math and Science Center, and I believe they've changed their name. That's in Richmond. I'm sorry, Richmond, Virginia. So that's an organization in Richmond. And they had Saturday morning, and it was open to all like Virginia high schools, middle schools and high schools. So check with your counselors. Your counselors are the most important folks throughout your schooling, your school years, because they should have that information on various programs, Saturday schools, summer camps. They should have or be looped in at least to those resources. Also check, I have to put a plug in for NOAA. There are undergraduates. So as you're thinking about, possibly the next couple of years, think about volunteering at a NOAA lab, especially if you're in like the high school, if you're in that age range. See if there's a NOAA lab nearby that is of interest to you. Reach out to the lab, ask if you can volunteer a couple of days, couple of hours. And I'm pretty sure that they will be open and willing to have you. And as you get ready for school and you enter your undergrad years, think about looking at some of the environmental agencies. So not just NOAA, of course, but EPA, Fish and Wildlife, look at all of those organizations because they have internships. The American Fisheries Society, which I'm the president-elect of, we have the Hutton Scholars Program. That's for high school students. And it's, geared at students that are interested in the fisheries field. So that's another program you should definitely check out. And there's funding available for that one too. I know quite a few of the agencies, they will have funding for the undergraduate portion. But the Hutton is one of the high school programs that I'd like to highlight.
Okay. And so we want to wrap up with, before getting your final words, you did mention that you went to FAMU for your graduate studies. And we wanted to hear about your HBCU experience and how that impacted your STEM career.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So just thinking about my background. So Richmond was, pretty diverse. I went to 2 HBCUs. Virginia Union is another, it's a smaller school. That was a HBCU. And I just felt very comfortable there. My high school, I was in various programs that worked with Virginia Union, and I was on the campus a lot. I was one of those students, I didn't necessarily want to go very far away from home. I just wasn't ready to leave home at that point. And so the experiences there, the smaller classrooms, just the attention from your teachers, that understanding, that cultural understanding was awesome. Going to Florida A&M, going to FAMU, it's a larger HBCU, but still the Environmental Sciences Institute was a small department, but to me, it's the foundation. The reason why I am where I am is because of Virginia Union and FAMU, because of that strong foundation, that social, cultural engagement that I had. I had, professors and staff members that were very supportive. Not saying that you don't receive that at majority schools, but I know for me, it was instrumental because, I was away from home. It was my first time being away from home for FAMU. And, I still visit Florida. It's like my second home because of those experiences, because that experience was like a family. My department was like a family. So it was the best decision I made. And that was one of, people kind of looked at me funny and they said, you would leave Rutgers and go to FAMU and HBCU? But I went to to an HBCU, and I had a job before I graduated. That doesn't typically happen. I was able to partner with an organization, with an agency, and it was just a great opportunity. So I'm glad that I went to a HBCU. I enjoyed my experience. It was a great experience for me. And I would encourage others, think about it. If that's something that you like, something you want, it's very individualized though.
And so any last parting words? You shared so much value, but we always like to give our speakers a chance to just get in those last few thoughts for our young minds.
Yes. Well, I would just tell, make sure to share with the students and the young minds, just don't be afraid, keep an open mind. Sometimes you will face challenges, but if you truly love the field and what you're doing, you will be fine. Ask questions. You're not in this alone. There are many people out there that are willing to mentor you. Don't be afraid to reach out to folks. No question is a silly question. So ask questions, reach out, think broad, and you can do it. You can definitely do it. And I'm excited to see you all coming up, after us.
Yes. Well, Dr. Croxton, we want to thank you for sharing your STEM journey and the wealth of knowledge that you've gained throughout your career and your studies. Also, I dropped a survey link to tonight's program in the comments and the chat box. So we please ask that you fill it out. You can include what you want to hear about in the future, and it really helps us to continue bringing you these programs to learn about STEM and STEM careers.
Any announcements, Carlin?
Also, I did forget to mention earlier that yesterday was World Water Day, and so we're so happy to feature, fishery biology and marine science for tonight's Teen Science Cafe. And with that being said, our STEM in the City workshop this coming Saturday is also going to be on marine science. And that is going to be on the technology called ROVs that marine scientists use to study deep in the ocean. So there is still time to register for that workshop, and I highly encourage, if you enjoyed hearing about that part of the presentation, then sign up for our STEM in the City workshop this Saturday.
So quick question, Dr. Croxton. Does NOAA use those? What are they called again, Carlin?
I can't remember the full name, but I know for sure the acronym is ROVs.
I want to say remotely operated vehicles is the actual name. So we do have those. In one of my photos, I showed a ship, and some of our ships are equipped with those ROVs, and they can actually go down to the seabed, and they're able to find new species. Like on one of our ships, we just found a new marine species. There are also links. You can have researchers down, in the ROVs, and they're transmitting information back up to the ship. And then our ships are streaming it out to whoever wants to look at it. You can see like shipwrecks, because sometimes we come across shipwrecks. You can see different floor types. So, if we're looking at hydrothermal vents or something like that, those are some of the pictures and some of the live feeds you can see. It's pretty cool.
So they need to turn in Saturday. So I just thought of like a drone for the sea. I never thought like they're big enough where people can be in.
Yes.
So I guess we'll learn more Saturday.
And drones. We have drones as well.
That go in the sea or just
not
look
in the
at
sea,
the water?
In the air.
I don't know nothing about that electronics, and I was a chemical engineer, so all this studying the living things, that ain't my lane. But thank you so much, Dr. Croxton. We have learned so much. I'm sure the teams have learned so much from you. And so we are really, really appreciate you giving of your time. We also know like Naima is on this call and this cafe. I'm sorry, been in too many Zoom meetings, right? Naima is on this call and she wants to be a marine biologist, so she will probably reach out to you just from hearing, your work. When I met you, I was like, oh, she pay attention to make sure crab are healthy because I don't eat oysters, but teaching us how important your work in is beyond, making sure we eat well, but how our oceans are an indicator of how the health of our planet. So thank you so much for giving of your time to inspire the next generation of marine biologists, fishery biologists, and policy influencers, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for inviting me.
All right. Well, thank everyone for joining the cafe. We hope to see you at the Next SEM Link event. And Carlin, how much longer can they catch the stories for World Water Day? A few more hours?
Yes, I would. Yes. Our World Water Day Instagram story from yesterday will still be up for a couple more hours.
Okay, so if you want to learn more about World Water Day, catch our stories. And don't they have a website you can put in the chat that they can listen? Go view.
It's on our Instagram page, which is at SimLink.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And everybody have a great evening. And we will see you at the next SEM Link event.